Yep, we're now live.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you everyone for attending the Schools Forum meeting today, the last of this academic year. Raj, apologies, would you like to just run through the apologies we've got?
Yeah, we've received apologies from James Burkett, Nikki Lamond, Siobhan Hearn, Sandra Appleby, Joe Sanchez Thompson, and also from Lee Hughes. We've got Annabelle Moore here as a sub, and also from Peter Cantley, who sent Peter French as a substitute.
Okay, but we've got, we're still core.
Yeah, we need 4 members to be core, so we're currently core, yeah.
Perfect. Okay, would you like to go through the any changes to the membership?
Yeah, Sharon Pinson has left Forum as a primary maintained representative, and we're currently in the process of looking to recruit new members to that sector, from that sector. So we'll be putting an ad out shortly.
Okay, lovely. And again, with Forum colleagues, if you know of anyone that might be interested in joining us or might be persuaded to join us, then please let Raj know. Declarations of interest?
I haven't received any, no.
No? Anyone wants to declare from Forum members at this stage that's relative to today's meeting? No? Okay. Shall we run through the minutes, Raj? You'll have all seen the minutes of the last meeting. Are there any comments on the accuracy of the minutes, or anything else in relation to the minutes, or is everyone happy for us to approve the minutes? I've got a very minor typo on page 6, Raj, but halfway down, members quarried. But outside of that, when we approve them, we can just get that tidied up. Has anyone got any comments on the minutes, or are we all happy for them to be approved? No, I think that takes silence as acceptance. Okay. Then if we move on to agenda item 3, Catherine.
Thank you. I'm just, hopefully you've seen the paper as part of the pack, and really it's to bring to Forum the scheme for financing schools for 22-23, the current financial year, with a view for ratification and publishing that we need to do. There's only a few amendments to ones that have been published previously, and that's as a result of the cessation of LGSS offering payroll services to schools and the change of process to the rates. The non-domestic rates has changed how it will be dealt with from the start of April 22. So we had to put those amendments or amend the document in line with those new processes. So it's only some minor changes, shall we say, nothing I wouldn't say controversial, but also just to highlight about a consultation starting later in the year, possibly to change, again depending on the outcome of the consultation, to change the reporting requirements from schools to submit monthly rather than quarterly. But that's all sort of just following the process of the scheme, or the guidance, shall I say.
Okay, I've gone through the papers myself. I'm sure Forum colleagues have. Are there any questions or discussion points that colleagues would like to have in relation to that paper? Is there any information you'd like, or any queries on it at all, if I throw it open to colleagues? Richard.
Hello. Yes, thank you. I suppose I'm catching up with things, but I'm just wanting to know the reasoning behind stopping the payroll systems for schools and then outsourcing those things? Is there any particular poignant reasons why that's happening?
I don't know. That's a decision that was made prior to sort of like myself looking at this scheme. I just know it used to refer to that terminology in the document, so I've just updated it accordingly. I wasn't involved in that sort of discussion at all, sorry.
That's okay. No, I'm just still trying to find out the reason behind it. And the reason why I say that is because the local authority schools that are left are just getting less and less support from the local authority. And really schools are being forced into academisation now because they haven't got those that back office support from the local authority. So that's just an observation.
Thank you, Richard. Neil, is there anything you'd like to add on that in terms of the service provision to the maintained schools from the local authority?
Yeah, thank you, Chair. And I understand the concerns that are raised with the changes in the services that are available. As colleagues will be aware, those support services post local government reorganisation in Northamptonshire were delivered through the West, and that's where the capacity in order to deliver those services was delegated to as a result of that. The West have taken a view that the business case for continuing to do so is not there. And we've tried to work with them to support schools to find alternative providers as we move forward. And actually, there was an extension in the timeline for some of those services in order to make that happen. However, I do understand that schools have had to go and seek alternative provision, and that in some cases has been not straightforward and certainly caused additional work. That doesn't, though, I think, reflect the desire of the local authority, certainly of Northants, to work with and support maintained schools, or all schools, in fact, and academies. Only that the direct provision of services is not possible within the current resource allocation that we have, and I think perhaps going forward we want to have a further conversation with schools about what that would look like, and particularly in relation to LA maintained schools. You know, if we have a conversation about what a potential local authority map might look like based on the white paper or anything like that, I think there is a further conversation to be had. But I accept the comment that was made, and understand that has caused some additional work for schools. But like I say, I wouldn't like you to think that's an indication of a lack of enthusiasm or energy by the local authority to work with all schools to support them as best we can.
Thank you, Neil.
Thank you. Just on that point, have the schools now migrated away, or is that happening over a phased period on payroll?
They have migrated, with the exception of one school which took an extension, but they're due to convert to a different payroll provider shortly. Right.
Okay. That makes sense. Okay. Are there any other comments on the scheme for financing schools, on the updates to the scheme? I think everything else looked fairly straightforward and similar to what we've seen in the past, well, what we've been operating with in the past. Okay, if there's no more comments on that, Raj, I think we've got a vote to approve the scheme. Would that be a vote of the maintained sector members only, or of the schools forum as a whole?
Yeah, I believe last time we did this vote last year, I think all members present approved the scheme. So just an indication of a vote.
Yeah. Okay, all those in favour of approving the scheme of delegation, if you want to raise your hands either virtually or physically.
I'm not sure. I don't think I have a right to vote as a union rep.
No, it's forum members, yeah, or their delegate.
I can see all members apart from Angela have voted in support. So
okay, against or abstain? Against? Yeah, have you got that?
Yeah, I've got that.
Raj, and abstain? Any abstentions? Yeah.
Yeah.
No. Okay. So.
Sorry, Angela, I hadn't got my act together. I'm in agreement.
Okay. Thanks, Angela.
Yeah.
Okay. So Raj, that vote is carried. I think with 1 against, isn't it?
No, it was unanimous.
Unanimous. Okay. All right. Perfect. If we can then move on to the Scnd funding. Is it Nicola?
Sorry, just unmuting myself. So, Raj, I've sent you an email with the updated, just a shortened PowerPoint. Are you able to? Oh, brilliant. Excellent. Okay, so for this afternoon, I've prepared, I sent out with the papers some information around the background to the green paper. So I just wanted to use that as the backdrop to some of the developments and the work that has taken place, which relates directly into the high needs block. So I'm sure people are really have heard quite a bit now around the green paper. It was published in March, and the consultation closes on the 22nd of July. But needless to say, it sets out the proposals for the system, and that, you know, the strapline is the right support in the right place and at the right time. If you look there on the slide, just highlighted it. So its key themes are around single national SENDs and AP provision, excellent provision from early years to adulthood. So how do we achieve that? Introducing the reformed and integrated role for alternative provision, and then reforming the system roles funding, which will be of interest particularly to this group, and accountability. So what I did on the next slide was I went through the paper and just picked out some of the key things that are coming through, which I think is interesting for us today. So one thing that the Green Paper is recognising, that although the funding's increased by more than 40% between the period 2019 and 20, and then again 2023, spending is still outstripping the funding. So that's in England. 2/3 of the local authorities within England also have deficits in their dedicated schools grant budget, and that is as a result of high need cost pressures. And by the end of 2021, the national total deficit was over £1 billion. So forecasts, so spending continues like it is at the minute, and with the increases driven mainly because of, we're seeing more children with EHCPs, which has been over and above general population change, which I'll talk a little bit about today. Then that additional investment, although the government have announced a bit additional investments of £1 billion in 22-23, they see very much the solution going forward around strengthening early intervention, and it basically is reinforcing that investment can't continue to rise at the current rates. And again, that reference to the vicious cycle of late intervention, low confidence and inefficient resource allocation. So on the next slide, there's a few other things I just think it's worth highlighting again from the Green Paper. It talks very much about the increased numbers of EHCP and specialist provision means often, and what we have found in Northampton, we are not alone on this journey, significant delays in accessing support, because suddenly we had this increase, and it was as a result of as the new legislation came through, and that happened in lots of authorities. So then we've had to pick ourselves up and address that. And as well as the increased numbers in placements and specialist provision, it also meant that it restricted the capacity. So we've got now children who are educated out of their local area, and subsequently to that, there's long journeys, as well as we know there's been significant increase in transport costs as well. So for most of the children in independence, even where they, that may not be the best for them, because we've got them in the local provision, ideally, the costs of such provision doesn't always represent the best value for money. So that's something, again, that we're very mindful of. So children and young people receive EHCPs and attend specialist settings, more financial resource and workforce capacity then. So we've got to go through that assessment process. So a child has to have an EHCP to attend a specialist provision. That means we've got less available to deliver our early intervention. And all of these things have been part of, I think, the current situation we find ourselves in. So that vicious cycle continues, and we know that we're not delivering the services we want to. So we want to see that the vast majority of young people, and this is again being reinforced in the Green Paper, should be able to access the support without the need for an EHCP, which I think was the original intention of the legislation. So the mantra, or what they're again outlining, is we want to identify promptly and support at the earliest possible point. So we're again thinking about how we shift that dial. And what I'm going to share now in the meeting, in the next slides, are some of the things. So if I go on to the next slide of the PowerPoint, really, if you bear that context in mind, and I've pulled out more of the financial aspects of the Green Paper. So what are we doing in Northants? And the direction that the director and the assistant director are taking, are we on the right tracks? And I think you'll see from our 3 key deliverables that the teams are working towards. It has been around developing that early help offer, so getting the locality teams established in the 4 localities in Northants. The bit I'm going to focus a little bit more on today is the bit around the specialist provision. So where do we want to get to? Well, we want to be responsive and have that flexible and effective local specialist provision, and an annual cycle, so we know that we've got the right support, the right specialist support in the right place at the right time. And it's a continuous cycle. It's not something we just achieve once. So we're going to talk a little bit about how we can get there. And then, of course, it's how we allocate those resources. So the other key area that we've been really focusing on is our governance arrangements, so that when we allocate specialist resources, not only do we know that they're good, but that we can understand what that demand is and respond to the different needs as the years or whatever progress. So on the next slide then, in order to do the piece of work around our having oversight really of what is our resource. So we want to get that early help offer, but we also want to be really, really clear about what our specialist resources are. We've done a piece of work, and on the next slide, we've looked at the following areas. So for us, we looked at, in particular, 3 key issues in the strategic planning, and there is a report that's we're just at the final stages of completing, which goes into much more of the depth of the headlines I'm giving you today. So we're looking at projections basically for any increased demand for specialist provision in the local authority area, and the evidence that supports that. Looking also then at options for meeting the increased demands. And to do that, then we're looking also at ways of managing demands for specialist provision, and that will come out in some of the points that I make towards the end of the presentation. So what we looked at on the next slide includes, we did work around the demographics, we did a needs analysis, looked at what the current provision is, the cost of provision, predicted shortfall, and then some options going forward. So on the next slide, we'll go into a little bit more detail. So you will have had in the presentation that was sent to you quite a bit more detail, but I guess you didn't want me just to, I didn't want to do death by PowerPoint. So I've just done some highlight slides, but there is a bit more detail in the PowerPoint and further detail then in the report when it comes out. So what we can note from what we found was that there's no significant growth in the pupil population, and in some ways a bit of a decline in the primary school population. There will be an increase in post-16, that's predicted around about the 2030 period, and then it falls away. So we have, like many authorities, seen an increase of 25% of the number of EHCP plans issued in 2021. But it's fair to say, if we look at nationally, we have fewer pupils. So we're around about low 3% of the local authorities, and some authorities are up to 4+%. So overall, and particularly with our local counterparts, we are on the lower than average. 44% of pupils attend a mainstream, and 55% attend some form of specialist provision. So we have currently 54 around about, this is a moving feast, but when the data return was done, we had around 54 pupils waiting specialist placement, and in addition to that, so we have children that are in a mainstream school who have been identified through their annual review process as needing a specialist placement as well. So we're looking at both of those groups of children. 73 of the 136 pupils we have in independence have a primary need of SEMH, and 30 of those have a primary need of AF. Sorry, I shouldn't be using acronyms. The autism spectrum disorder, and SEMH refers to social emotional mental health difficulties. So on the next slide, I've just talking a little bit about the types of provision that we have in North Northants. This is really interesting. I've just highlighted for you the resource provision units against the special school children, and that's interesting in that some authorities it would be by far the other way round. So you can see in terms of our graduated approach, there's little choice other than for the majority of children. It's between mainstream and often the next point would be special school. So I just wanted to highlight that. On the next slide, I've just also highlighted this. I've removed the figures because I do want to just let people know we're still in the process of confirming these, and I'll explain a little bit about the work that we're doing with our special schools and units. But you can see from this, if you look at the excuse me, the type. So at the top there you've got unit provision, and you can see the majority of the unit provision is in the Corby area. And we have one unit in East Northants. But then when you look at the special school, We've got a range of those of our 8 special schools. They are across spread across North Northants. If we move on to the and we've got of that group about 74 children coming from out of the area. When we look at the independent non-maintained settings, it's an interesting picture, and I've just highlighted again the thing that will probably most sit out of those figures are the numbers of SEMH children that are accessing our independent provision, and I would say, you know, that usually in authorities autism is really high, so we have got 22% of our children have autistic spectrum disorder, but I wanted to highlight that, and I've got just a little bit of I'll talk to you a little bit about where I think we might want to think going forward in the future. So on the next slide, again, just a summary. So this is all circa around about 1,569 attend specialist placements, and then you've got the figures there for how those are broken down into the special, independents, and I think, and the units. The unit provision is predominantly related to ASD autism, which wouldn't be too different to a lot of local authorities. And again, the independent placements are often associated with social, emotional, and mental health and autistic spectrum disorder needs. Okay, on the if we go to the next slide, then Raj doing a brilliant job, by the way. So with our budget, it's just to really acknowledge that, like I mentioned earlier, like many other authorities, we have an overspend. We have that 2.2 million as we know it. I know that there's work going on with the finance team, so that that may be slightly different, but that's roughly where we are in terms of our high needs budget, as you can see there on the slide. So I wanted to set that in the context of the next couple of slides. So if we go on to the next one, thanks, Raj. So if we've got that deficit, we know that when we look at our figures, okay, we spent round about 7.2 million on our independent non-maintained specialist provision. So let's have a look at what the average costs for the placements look like. And there is a range, and I know that you'll have, for those of you that look through the PowerPoint slide, you'll see what that range is. But the average is 53,000. For the cost of a special school placement can be between 11 and 30. The cost of the unit is around 13 to 16. So that gives you an idea of how we are potentially spending our money. On the next slide, I suppose as I raised earlier, one of the things I think that we will want to consider going forward is, if you look at currently we've invested a lot in terms of our special school places, but the unit provision is significantly less, and that's something that we've been making some headway with schools to see to get interest from mainstream schools, see if that's something we could build up as part of our graduated approach. So on the next slide, we did some next. Thank you. We did some discussions around what would be the indicators. What's the shortfall indicators that we might want to consider when we're thinking in terms of sufficiency. So I think it'd be clear to see from the evidence already presented that we have a shortfall in terms of places, but we also recognise that we know we've got more work we need to do in relation to our high needs, our early help offer. So if we look at the children we've got without a school place, if we look at a couple of indicators here, how many are in independent, and we thought about reducing those numbers. If we look at the general rate of increase within for EHCPs, and also you can see there that we haven't got any real indicator around predicted growth in pupil population. So we came up with a figure of around about 250 of a shortfall. So on the next slide, we started to have a think about how we might address that. So if we, for example, were to look at our enhanced or our unit provision, increasing that by, so 50% of that 257 could be around securing a unit provision, as well as then looking at our special school, working with our special school providers to secure those additional places. So that's the work that we've currently been doing. So if we go on to the next slide, I think the £4.1 million question is what do we, it is going to be around what we think about our SEMH provision. And I think I wanted to raise today the fact that we again have specialist provision via alternative provision, which is also something to put into the equation. And it's really to raise the issue that if you look at, so if you take the SMH, it's a really, really good example of, we don't have an early help officer. We haven't got, for example, Key Stage 1 and 2 outreach support, although schools can buy specialist outreach support from Maplefields, our SEMH special school. And I guess what some of the work that we've been doing is talking to both our special school and unit providers, and that's Wood Newton and Park schools, to see if that's something that we could develop going forward. And I think the fruits of that would be that we can, again, back to Green Paper and the recommendations, we can get in and do that early help, have specialist teams that are available when they're needed to support children earlier on in their journey. So that's something we progressed with a paper that we pulled together with Maplefields, and that will be being shared with the director and the assistant director in the next week or two. And then we've also been reviewing specialist provisions, so we've spent some time with the units to talk about what they're currently delivering and the potential of that being expanded, but slightly different conversations around Key Stage 3. And there's certainly been some appetite from chief execs of the trust to engage in how we might be able to fruitfully look at doing some of the support for our more vulnerable children with their SEMH through more enhanced support within the mainstream setting. And again, there's some really great examples of that in other local authorities. And I think we're fortunate because we've got some school leaders who have seen that and have moved into the authority and are keen to develop that with us. So those are some of the things that we're thinking about going forward, because I think if what we're demonstrating through this presentation is we know we're spending a lot on AP, we know we're spending a lot on the independent providers, and we haven't done that early investment. So that these will be some of the proposals that we're wanting to pull together and think, if we take what the Green Paper is saying and what we know works, that those will be the things that we will want to take forward as we move into this next phase. So on the next slide, I've just if you move on, so I've sort of covered that really. So our next steps in terms of this particular piece of work, we have met with the special school heads and we've identified some areas in which we think there's potential to increase capacity. We've also met with the unit head teachers, and again, we've identified where there's potential. We've also had expressions of interest from mainstream schools. And again, we've collated, and we are now at the stage where we're going to do some feasibility studies. So that's been, it's been a busy couple of weeks getting all of that work underway. And we're also in conversations with some of our secondary heads about developing some of their school-based AP. So if we move on to the other area that I wanted to just share with the group, and we've already talked this through with the high needs subgroup, is how we then would look at, so if we're thinking about specialist provision, which is everything I've talked to up to now, how do we support mainstream schools so that they don't need to go down the route of having to have the EHCP to get some additional support. So this section, for the last couple of slides, I'm just going to talk you through what we pulled together in terms of having an early help offer for our children in mainstream. So we want, and I think it's based on the principle that we really do want to put the funding for the majority of the children in the hands of the schools. So that's, you know, where schools know what they need to do, and it means they can, the children and young people can have that quicker access to the provision without having to go through lots of hoops. And I think one of the things that we have been working on in the background, and we'll be able to share with school leaders in the autumn, is being really transparent and clear with how funding is spent, so that they can be part of that decision-making process going forward. So if I go to the next slide, what we've created the proposed model, which has been also shared with the SENCOs, school SENCOs, is, most people in the world of special needs will know about the four, the cycle, the assess, plan, do and review. So we would always expect that that's the first thing that happens in terms of the graduated approach. So that back at the school, we need that there would be evidence that that's happened. For the step 2, then we would be expecting on the next slide that schools. Oh, I've just left that one in, but that is the graduated approach, and I know that everybody will be familiar with that from the. So it just outlines mainstream school through to specialist provision and independent, but there is that graduated approach. So if we just move it on to the next slide, I'll cover then the next steps would be that where we want to move to is that local specialist team would get involved with the child. So we've got the specialised SENS support service, the educational service, and then we have the sensory medical physical complex service, complex needs service. And then, as I say, we've got work underway to develop social, emotional and mental health outreach services. So each school has access. And then where we've done everything we think to support that the child, that's when we would think about some additional early help funding, and that would then move through to step 3, which is on the next slide, and that just outlines then the process of applying for that. So what we're proposing, or what we're planning to do, is to have locality decision-making groups. We've asked heads to be involved and part of that, so that decisions about funding will be agreed, and there will be criteria, and that process of moderation would be through a panel process, which would be led by school leaders, as well as the support service. That evidence then would be so that would be the process, and there would be a panel for each of the local areas. So we're proposing that gets set up from September of this year. So in summary then, on my final slides, you'd be glad to hear the next steps we've got are around these 6 areas. So we've already started the work on how realigning the Scnd teams into localities, and we want to build that local offer, and we really want to help have the school leaders we want to be more facilitating that for school leaders. In terms of repurposing then, so any capacity where we've identified those mainstream schools to develop specialist unit provision, that's our other area of work. Expanding then where we can existing special school provision, and then as I've talked you through some of the headlines around establishing that new early help model for our children with social, emotional, mental health difficulties, and beginning to think about how we reduce that reliance on independent sector for specialist provision, as well as working with our school leaders on how we can look at developing opportunities for AP. And the final slide is just highlighting then the very immediate things which I think will form the basis of some of the reporting we'll be bringing back to this group. So Raz, I'm hoping that there is another slide there. We right at the cusp of developing what the current resources posters for our school leaders look like in each locality, so they can work with us in terms of how we shape that going forward. We have been undertaking this term the review of the top-up funding in all our mainstream schools, and that information has been coming back, so we've been finalising that. So that then will help us in formulating the new early help funding model that we'll be delivering on in September. We'll finalise in the next couple of weeks where we think we can put some firm proposals for the additional capacity in a special unit, and obviously that will do all the costings behind that, and that will mean undertaking some of those feasibilities as well, and then reviewing one of the key tasks going forward will be to review our children in independent places. So I think that's it. But I guess please do ask me some questions. I think if we think about the backdrop of where we started and where the Green Paper's really taking us, a bit of the headline about how we're spending the money, and then some of the key themes I think for going forward. There's significant work to do in this area, but it's giving a sort of indication of I think the general shape of where we're going. But I don't know if Neil wants to come in and add anything to round that all off. Otherwise, happy to take questions.
Thanks, Nicola. Yeah, so I mean that was quite a quick run through. I know there's a lot of content, but as Nicola says, there's a lot more detail behind that we're able to share. I think from a schools forum perspective, this is with a view to developing the work that we're doing around the support and delivery of the high needs block and everything that goes along with that, and ensuring a sustainable position as we move forward. As Nicola mentioned, as we went through, the high needs block subgroup has met and will meet again in the autumn to develop some of these ideas further and to work collaboratively with us to move this forward. And we think that's going to work really well. But obviously we can't stand still while we wait for everything to develop around us. We do need to be moving forward and getting in place the support that we need. So as Nicola said, I think what's really important now is if you've got any questions or thoughts on that, we'd appreciate them, and we'll try and respond and build that into the work as we go forward.
Peter, would you like to go first?
Yeah, just a question on one of the earlier slides around demographics. You said that the primary numbers were falling. Were you including within that assumption the new house building that's taking place across Northamptonshire? Because obviously that would have an impact on funding you'll need for high needs and so on.
I'll need to double check on that, so I'll come back, but I'll make a note of that. That's a good point to raise.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Laura?
Yeah, I have a couple of questions, if that's okay, Chair. So the first one was that I'm aware of at least 8,000 new homes in Wellingborough and the Stanton Cross development. So it interests me that the predicted a decline in primary places isn't what we're actually seeing in Wellingborough, and I think that's really, really important to flag that. I'm also a bit worried about the potential for people's understanding of what's going on to be a bit lost here, because as people know, I've got I'm the head of Rowan Gate, spread over 3 sites. One of them, the school in Wellingborough, was built for 90 children. In September, in exactly the same footprint, we'll have 142 children. So though on paper, that looks like those children have got places and that their needs are being met, you know, I wouldn't want that to be lost, Nicola, in the understanding of what's actually going on. You know, we're almost at the point where we've got double the amount of children on the Wellingborough site that we should have. And then the other one is just to raise the impossibility of trying to, you know, we're the only maintained special school left, but we haven't got a budget yet, and we're into the end of the first quarter of the financial year, and I still haven't seen a budget. So I feel like I'm trying to do all of this in the dark, really, and I just wanted to raise that as well.
Yeah, no, and I know that I'm hoping that there's going to be some positive news on the budget front, which I'll leave Neil to respond to, but they're all really important points, Laura, and I think what I wanted to just get across today was some just headlines. So I think, you know, the headline is we need more places. How we now go about securing that will be the work that we will want to do with obviously the special school leaders like yourself. And I think that will be that next detail will come. So this really is just high level stuff that I think the first thing we needed to assure ourselves is, do we need, is in some authorities I've worked, it hasn't been a case that we've needed any more special school places, but we are clear that that is the case in Northants. Now we need to get into the detail of that. And I'm taking on board the comments that have been made about the new housing estates, and we will follow that through as well, because that potentially will have, you know, that could have implications if it hasn't been factored in.
No, that's great. Thank you, Nicola. Thank you.
And Neil, oh, there you are. Do you want to say anything about?
Well, in terms of place planning, obviously the additional capacity is built in, because obviously that's how we lead into getting Section 106 agreements and the like, to ensure we have the capacity to build extra schools. And we've got new schools opening to reflect that additional capacity, and that's built in over a period of time, between sort of 2 and 5 years is how that works on. The impact of that in relation to SEN, from a proportionality point of view, I think we can build in, but actually the changing nature of how those needs are met will need to be built in. And as Nicola says, we need to make the work we do around estimating future, we need to finesse the work that we've done already to ensure that it reflects the changing nature of the way in which those needs will be met and the way in which we expect schools and the system to operate as we go forward. In relation to the budget position, clearly we need to be supporting whatever process we put in with an appropriate budget system that underpins that around high needs funding and other things that we've had the conversation about here previously. And in terms of the issues we've had this year around getting the special school budgets out and those sorts of things, whilst I think they're pretty much resolved now, we can move forward with that. Obviously for future years, it wouldn't be reasonable to expect schools to plan and manage without that information that they need. So like I say, I think we will be resolving this year's issues very quickly now, but we absolutely take the concerns that schools have raised about the access to financial information being delayed this year for many and varied reasons. We can only apologise, that's not where we want to be, but looking to the future, absolutely we need a financial system that underpins what we're trying to do, but also provides schools with information they need to plan ahead.
Okay, thank you, Neil. Angela, you've got a question, your hand up. Are you still on mute, Angela?
Sorry, I'm just not got my head in gear today with this. I said I'm delighted to see that the Green Paper talks about strengthening early intervention, and it's absolutely needed and great that Nicola has really embraced this in the paper. But sadly, what we're seeing is the nursery schools facing reductions to high needs funding, a pausing of being able to make applications for high needs funding. And talking on behalf of colleagues and other maintained nursery schools, I was asked to raise a question if there was any clarity on what's happening with high needs funding in early years, because if we are really going to talk about strengthening early intervention, then we need to be doing some of that work before that. We are schools, and really have to think about that and what role we can play in alternative provision, resource provision, because certainly in Northants, we did have resource provision within our maintained nursery schools. There was a provision within Ronaldtree and Kettering previously. So really just to raise that. And then I suppose if we are thinking about funding in the hands of schools, again, I'd be talking about, why was the decision and what was the decision and rationale for the 8p notional send, because when we spoke about that last time, we didn't talk about the 8p notional send at Schools Forum. We talked about the capping at 160k. If we are really trying to get the money directly to the children who need it, and we're struggling with funding, what was the rationale behind that?
Okay, I'm happy to start. Neil, do you want? So first to say, Angela, my whole, everything I've done in the area of SEND is on the basis that the cornerstone to really effective practice within a local authority is the early years, right? So, it's about these children as they come through and go into and get a really, really solid transition. I know that I'm thinking, Neil, that the paper today, so what I described for the early help funding for schools, we've done a similar proposal, and we'll be sharing that next week in the there's 2 sessions set with early year settings. it's a similar it's a similar proposal for early years, so we'll be able to share that with you. But you're absolutely right in terms of the graduated approach. So I think there's huge potential for working certainly with nurseries. That's been my experience of all the different authorities I've worked in. I know that the director and assistant director have brought some specific expertise in around early years, as well as there's really exciting developments happening around early help and family hubs and things like that. So at the minute, those conversations are starting, but what I will be doing is really focusing in on developing the strategy now for early years in the coming months. So I think that we'll take that into the autumn term, but it's absolutely key. But I'm gonna hand over to Neil, because I don't think I've got the answer to one of your questions around the funding that you mentioned, but I'm sure Neil will.
Thanks, Nicola.
Yeah, so in relation to the future of what was historically called high needs funding in early years, I think high needs funding is a terminology that we're looking to move away from. We don't think that's helpful, and move towards a more early help model, as Nicola has described, and certainly Nicola talked about early help intervention funding that we would like to move towards in the school sector. In terms of the early years sector as a whole, that change of approach that was put forward with the funding that supports it, I think there are a couple of meetings next week that all early years providers have been invited to, where I think colleagues are going to set out in detail what that looks like and how that's going to work. So I think that will provide some of the information, or hopefully all of the information that we're required to give the reassurance that that is being underpinned again with funding that is used from an early help perspective, not going back to what the high needs funding was. And we've discussed this before about high needs funding being used to prop up what are really unsustainable and inappropriate arrangements over a long period of time, which is not what we want to move towards, but to a more interventionist model, early help model that looks to manage and meet needs in a more effective way. In terms of the more early years funding specifics, I don't think we really need to go into that again at this in this meeting. As you say, the early years element of the main the notional element of the main element of early years funding was maintained, whilst the non-SEN element of it was increased, and money was set aside for what was high needs at the time, but it's now moved on to a more early intervention basis. And I think we've been through that at a previous meeting. But like I say, I think it is fair to update that there will be meetings next week that I think will set out with clarity what the new approach to early help, early intervention funding will look like within the early years sector.
Thank you, Neil.
Thank you, Neil. Rob.
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, just a couple of points. One is, I actually think the plan is a really solid plan, and I think it's really well set out. And I think the way, I think I've diagnosed the areas on your graduated approach that still need quite a lot of work, and there are parts of, certainly parts 1 to 4, there are elements where there's still quite a lot of work needed. There's still some unevenness in things like unit provision. But I actually think it's certainly setting out a direction that we can all get behind. Two simple questions. One is, I like the idea of calling things early help intervention fund rather than high needs fund, because I think that carries the wrong sorts of, people take the wrong mindset about it. But I would just ask that you keep communicating with schools and heads in particular, and Senkos in regard to how things like early help intervention funds will be established and run, etc. So I've got a bit of information around that from the slides that you've put out, and I recognise they're out in the public, but not everybody reads them, and I just think people need to know the information as soon as you know it, so that they've got that. And I'll certainly be pushing those messages out there. So getting that communication out, I think, is important. But the question I've got is in regard to your next steps, which is on page 83. So you've set out developing to reviewing with steps in between. And I think, Nicola, I was right in saying you said you were kind of coming towards where you think is the end of what you're developing. and then you've got the next steps to go through. All I would like to know is, and I know it's a difficult question to answer, but what is your time frame for these steps to go through, so that as a schools forum, when you come back and say to us in January, for example, actually we've got through the reviewing stage, that's where we thought we were going to be, after the developing, the second stage, etc. What are the time frames here? Because people often talk to me about their frustrations that it takes too long to actually move through these steps.
And I think that's a really good question, because sometimes you can look at this and think, you know, one of the things on there is, for example, you know, we're going to go out and now we've talked to all the special school heads and we talked to all the unit, you know, to the mainstream heads. And then, of course, the next thing is, okay, so if we've decided that there's a viability with now, you know, expanding or, you know, development of provision, now we've got to do the feasibility. And I'm sure that Neil's going to come in a minute, but though, and again, that takes time. So I take your point that, you know, the next steps for me is setting out really clearly. So the next paper needs to come with that specific. So if you take just the one area, that one alone, we intend that at the next schools forum, we should be in a position to say, these are, we've done the feasibility, so we think these are the goers, and then we need to speak clearly, you know, with the school leaders and with then the capital team to understand what the time frame would be. So then that comes in the next paper. I think this one was here's the headlines, but you're absolutely right. I work very much on a basis of program management, so everything, you know, comes within that, you know, with that caveat. So when will we meet that and achieve that milestone? I think as well, it's really important when we're doing this type of work, that because it helps to manage expectations from schools, because the problem is when you sit in this end, I'd love to get it all done overnight, but you know, there's so many factors to consider, because you know there are lots of stakeholders and lots of people that, you know, we need to take with us. So we can come back and be really clear about that going forwards.
Neil, would you like to add?
Only as much as there are a number of threads going on in relation to SEN, as people will be aware. And as I said earlier, what we can't do is stand still while we wait for all of those to come to a conclusion and then move forward. So we are trying to manage that. And Nicola and I were in a meeting this morning where we were talking about how we manage the rate of progress on each of these areas. And so, as we say, I think we will come back in the autumn with more in terms of proposals. Members may be aware, colleagues may be aware that there is now a new round of special free school bids been opened, and you know we're absolutely actively looking at what our response to that will be in relation to the work that Nicola set out. But colleagues will also be aware of the work that's going on jointly with health around the ICS and all those sorts of things. And at some point, all of those things need to come together. But like I say, equally, we can't just wait for that conclusion and then move forward. So this can feel slightly messy, but I do think it will resolve itself as time moves on into an aligned piece of work. And those threads are talking to each other and having those conversations. But like I say, it's not one big cohesive picture as yet. It's a number of threads coming together towards that. And that's, like I say, necessary in order that we do move forward and don't you know, have drift and delay in dealing with what are really quite pressing problems from us, not just from a financial perspective in relation to the forum, but obviously in terms of meeting need, which is obviously the most important thing.
Thank you, Neil. I think a lot of the questions I'd had around it have been answered anyway, and quite a few from Rob's questions. I think it is key that we have for the next meeting a timeline so that we've got some idea when these places are going to be ready to use, because that's going to have a significant impact on the budget. The only other question I don't think I've got answered is have you got the capital funding allowed in place clearly, as Laura was articulating earlier, they're bursting at the seams. You won't be able to put more children into those facilities without something happening. And I guess the same is with the units. There's probably plenty of people or the opportunities to put new units in or increase current units, but that will require a degree of capital. Do we have the capital?
So I think that's probably for me to answer. So yes, the government have allocated us SEND capital to support this. It was part of their response to the pressure on the high needs budget, in addition to some additional revenue that came in through the dedicated schools grant. So over the course of the next 3 years, the capital programme as a whole, which includes basic need and capitalised repairs, is over £20 million that we have to invest. Now, only obviously a subset of that is specifically related to SEN, but we would want to use it all as creatively as possible, I think is the point I want to make, in order to support the delivery. But in terms of, we've got a unit that we're currently, looking at, which would cost around £1 million to deliver. Those sorts of things are doable within the envelope of funding that we've got. And like, as you've said, we come back in the autumn and say, look, this is those that we think we're going to take forward. This is the funding that we're going to make it happen. And there is a real commitment to get on with it. This funding, I mean, it's not time limited as such, but actually it's been given to us to effect a change now, and that's what we need to do.
Okay, thank you. Have colleagues got any other questions? I think that's a good range of questions so far, and good debate on it. Is there anything else before we move on with the agenda, or are we happy to thank Nicola? That was a very extensive report and very clear. I found it probably the clearest information I've seen for some time on the high needs block, or the SEN, and the problems and the way that we're planning to solve them. So very grateful for that. Thank you, Nicola.
Thank you.
If there's nothing else, shall we move on to item 5 on the agenda, the government consultations?
Thank you, Chair. Yeah, I think that's me. So in relation to education, children's services as a whole, as you'll be aware, there are a number of key publications that have been made recently, in particular the Green Paper and the White Paper, but also some other consultations. One of those is attached in relation to the direct national funding formula going forward. Now, clearly, as a local authority, we will be wanting to respond to those consultations, obviously the Green Paper and the consultation, the White Paper being different, as a local authority, but the Schools Forum may or may not wish to respond to them as a Schools Forum from the financial perspective. Now, I think Nicola's kind of been through a lot of the Green Paper issues with you and linked those nicely to the finance issues in the paper that she's already done. And like I say, the view we wanted to take from the forum today is whether the forum itself wanted to make a response or just be aware of and party to the response the local authority was going to make. The other consultation, which has been circulated, has got the report, is around changes to the national funding formula, which is more specific. And it is quite detailed. So our view was, rather than going through it at the full meeting like this, it might be worth having a small group that got together to have a look at it to see if there are any particular issues the forum might want to raise. And so that's what's proposed in the document. So the two questions from this item are: one, does the forum want to, on its own behest, respond to the Green Paper? And secondly, would the forum agree that getting a small group of people, volunteers together to have a quick look, because I don't think it will take very long, about the national funding, direct funding consultation, be the best route just to respond to that in an effective way?
Okay, thanks, Neil. Again, there's a lot of papers in relation to that, and working through the consultation details and the white paper details. I think my view is that working with the local authority and doing a joint submission with the local authority probably gives a strength of opinion there, and that it would be an idea, given the timeframes between now and the consultation submission dates, to form a subgroup, because those submission dates are before the next forum meetings. But I'd like to open it up again to colleagues to find out what views our colleagues have got on the schools forum in relation to this. Peter?
Yeah, my first flippant comment is I'm not quite sure what the point is of responding, as we've now on our third education secretary in 48 hours, and goodness knows how long he's going to last. But my more serious one is just to say the Diocese of Peterborough has responded to the Green Paper because we cover 4 local authorities. So from my perspective, we've responded as our own diocese.
Mm-hmm. And what about other colleagues? Do you feel that a combined or an input from schools forum into the local authority would provide some strength? I remember at the previous meetings where we've talked about funding in particular and talked about needing to get our voice heard on the need for more funding. This is an opportunity to be able to provide some feedback in. Laura?
Yeah, thank you. Well, yes, I do feel it would be really useful to work together to put in a response to the paper. And I think, given this, if you don't mind me using the phrase, the sort of new feel of working with local authority colleagues now, and the willingness to make change, I think it is important that we work together to make a joint response. So yeah, I'd be keen to do that.
Okay. Rob?
Thanks, Chair. My understanding, I may be wrong, but my understanding was the consultation closed on the 1st of July for the Green Paper. So I'm not sure whether we can still make a response. I know there are other, I think there are other events going on still that we can still perhaps contribute towards, but I think the actual consultation process closed on the 1st of July. In terms of the second element of that, which is looking at the formula, sort of the national funding formula, I think that's a sensible idea. It's an area that a lot of people don't really have much of an understanding on. And I think as a forum, we should use our base to educate as many people as possible around how the changes that happen quite often in terms of the formula, and as we move to a national funding formula, that they're aware of that so that they can financially plan for that within their schools.
Yes, I'd agree with that, and it's in particular moving to the hard funding formula of all the IDACI elements within the funding formula that are locally determined that will form part of the national determination as the formula becomes a hard funding formula. So I think the general feeling I'm getting is on the national funding formula, it would be worthwhile, and colleagues would like to form a small subgroup and put in a joint response with the local authority now.
Yeah, we'd be happy to facilitate that. I've been reminded that there was also much more recently an early years element to that. So I'll put that differently, a separate early years consultation that's been published as well. And so we'll liaise with early years colleagues about how we respond to that as well. So we'll cover both of those.
So colleagues, have you got for the small subgroup, have we got some volunteers who would like to or be willing to have those short meetings in the coming weeks, or short meeting within the coming weeks to put something together on behalf of Forum? I'm quite happy to be involved with that. If I'm around. Laura, you're happy? Rob, that's great, thank you. Anyone else want to be involved? So I think there's Rob, Laura, and myself so far. Yeah, okay. Neil, would you like to put out some dates then and we can arrange a meeting?
Yeah, we'll do that straight away.
Yeah, and again, if any other colleagues would like to join, if they let Neil know or Raj know, we'll pass the details on. Okay, thank you. If there's Laura, is there anything else you'd like to add in that? Your hands up.
Sorry, Paul, one of the children's just been in, so I had to step back for a second. I didn't hear that.
You're happy to join the subgroup, and Neil will push some dates out when we can arrange a meeting.
Of course, yeah, no, that's fine, no problem at all. Thank you.
Okay. So Raj, schools forum plans for 22-23.
Yeah, so the next meeting is scheduled for the 20th of October. We were supposed to have a DSG funding item at this meeting, but unfortunately the report wasn't ready, so that'll be coming to the next meeting. And really, I just wanted to open it up to members for any suggestions or anything you lot would like to look at the next meeting.
Neil?
So if I can add to that, so the forum would be expecting to see DSG outturn figures, which are not available as yet, and a more detailed budget for the coming year. But equally, given the pressures on the finance team and on colleagues in children's services, that's not where we want it to be. So that's a key element that we need to come forward with in September, with a view to having a conversation at that point about any work that we need to do in order to get that agreed for the following year, for the 23-24 year. We don't want to be in the position we were in this year where we're very, very late with that. So I think the next meeting is quite a key meeting to look at the outturn, to think about the budget for this year and what any changes we want to make for the coming year, so that we can have a proper consultation with schools as forum is required to do, and make the decision either in December or January, depending on how the meetings fall, and move forward with it. So we really want to be planning that out. So with Raj, we'll plan those elements in. I think the other aspect to this item on the agenda is for members to highlight any issues they think should come forward and might be useful in that, because we can then do some work over the summer to prepare for that, and move forward. So, you know, it doesn't have to be in the meeting now, but if there are any thoughts that you've got about issues that would be helpful for the forum to discuss, or things that we should be developing for the coming years, if you can let myself or Raj know, then we'll try and build that into the forward plan. And then from that point on, I think we're hoping to get into more of a rhythm of the schools forum, which those of you who've been involved with the meetings for some time will be used to, in terms of those usually full meetings a year and how those flow into each other and the information that flows into them. So this year, well, the whole of the time since local government organisation up to this point, we've kind of been playing catch up, but we need to get to the point where we're ahead of the game and actually have that forward plan with that rhythm of the work of the forum going forward. So like I say, it doesn't have to be in the meeting now, but if you've got any thoughts about that, please do let Raj and myself know, and we'll build that into the forward plan.
Thank you, Neil. I think the one thing that from the discussions we've had today, which I'm sure you will have in that forward plan, is that standing item on the high needs and SEND, and particularly with more refining the timelines of when we're going to start to see some additional capacity coming on stream. So I think that will probably be, if it's not already a standing agenda, it's one that will need to come up at each of the meetings, and particularly with the next one. If colleagues have got anything else they'd like to add in now, or just pass the information to Raj, and he can build that into the next meetings. Is that okay? Raj, is there any other urgent business?
No, I don't have any urgent business now.
Okay, so is there, from colleagues, has anyone got any other business they would like to discuss? If you want to say or pop your hand up for a minute. No? Okay, well, I think we've gone through everything on the agenda. Thank you very much to everyone. Thank you very much for your time. I know how busy a time it is at the moment, particularly with the uncertainty that we have within our education leadership establishments. As Peter said earlier, we've got a new Secretary of State today. Whether we'll have another one tomorrow, who knows? And the same with the ministerial teams. But thank you very much for your participation.